I've traveled alone before. Business trips, writing retreats, even the occasional cabin weekend when I needed to get away from everything. It was never something I feared. If anything, the solitude gave me clarity, time to think, to reset. So when I booked that Airbnb in rural Oregon, a 3-night stay in a wood-framed cabin surrounded by pine, I didn't feel nervous. I felt ready. I needed the space. The listing had good photos, a few vague but positive reviews. The kind of place you'd scroll past unless you were looking for something remote. Which I was. I'd been going through a lot. Personally, professionally. I won't get into all of it here. Just know that I was tired and I needed quiet. I got the quiet, but not the kind I expected. From the moment I arrived, things felt still, too still. Not in the peaceful, meditative way, the kind that makes you pause and listen, like the world is waiting for something. It started with small things. Things you wouldn't mention to anyone because they sound like nothing. A movement in the corner of your eye that isn't there when you turn. A light you thought you turned off, but hadn't. Or had you? I remember the first night there, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling. No traffic, no planes overhead, just trees outside and the ticking of the old wall clock in the next room. I closed my eyes and told myself I was overthinking, that I was just in my head. But something wasn't right. You know that feeling you get when you realize someone's been in your home? Even if nothing's missing, even if everything's in its place. Just the sense, somehow, that things aren't as they were. I couldn't name it. I couldn't prove it. But I felt it. And by the second night, that feeling wasn't just lingering. It was following me. What happened in that cabin over the next 48 hours changed how I look at privacy, at trust, at strangers. There's no dramatic twist here. No hidden cameras or masked intruders. At least, not that I saw. But something happened. Something I'm still trying to explain. This is what I remember. I booked the place about 2 weeks before I left. It was early October. The kind of fall that doesn't feel like fall yet. Just dry air and long shadows. I'd been browsing places within driving distance from Portland, looking for somewhere I could finish a draft I'd been putting off. The listing came up halfway down the page. No flashy title, no quirky cabin in the woods puns. Just private one-bedroom cabin with wood stove. The price was low, lower than I expected for that time of year. But I told myself it was probably due to the location. Remote. No nearby attractions. Exactly what I wanted. The photos showed a small pine cabin surrounded by trees. Nothing out of place. Wooden porch. A single rocking chair. A little writing desk next to a window. There were 4 reviews. All short. All positive. Peaceful place. Had a great time. Host was responsive. Just what I needed. No detail, but no complaints either. The host's profile was minimal. First name only. No photo. Just a badge that said, "Joined in 2019." I hesitated for maybe 5 seconds, then booked it. I remember thinking how nice it would be to unplug. No social media, no deadlines. Just coffee, cold air, and the sound of trees. When I messaged the host to confirm, they replied a day later. Short response. "Door will be open, keys on the table. Let me know if you need anything." I said thanks, told them my arrival time. They didn't respond again. That should have stood out. Most hosts I dealt with were eager. Some sent restaurant lists, trail maps. This one didn't even sign their name. But it didn't seem strange then. Just simple. I packed a weekend bag, grabbed some groceries, filled up the tank. I didn't tell many people where I was going. Just a friend from work. I said I'd be back by Monday. I left around noon on Friday. I still remember how quiet the drive was once I got off the main roads. The radio cut out. GPS kept recalculating. The trees got thicker, taller. The road turned to gravel. About 20 minutes from the nearest town, I lost cell service entirely, and maybe that's when things really began. I arrived at the cabin just before sunset. The air smelled like wet bark and cold earth, the kind of clean that makes your lungs sting a little. The cabin was exactly like the photos. Pine wood, a metal roof, one single step leading up to the porch. It looked old but cared for. No trash, no overgrowth. Just quiet. The door was unlocked like the host said it would be. It opened stiff, like it hadn't been used in a while. Inside, it was one open room. Wood stove in the corner, a bed with a hand-stitched quilt, bookshelves along one wall, a small kitchenette. No TV, no Wi-Fi. Just a radio on the counter, one of those old ones with a turning dial and a little red needle. The key was there, on the table. Next to it, a note. Help yourself to wood. Don't forget to latch the door at night. That was it. I unloaded my bag, set my laptop on the desk by the window, made a cup of instant coffee, and started a fire in the stove. I didn't really notice it then, but the place was colder than it should have been. Even with the fire going, there was a draft I couldn't find, like something was breathing behind the walls. That first night, I tried to write, but I kept getting distracted. It wasn't noise. There was no noise. No cars, no animals, no wind after dark. Just this absence of sound, so complete it made your ears ring. And then the smell. It was faint, metallic, old, like rusted water in a pipe that hadn't been used in years. I walked around trying to find the source, but it seemed to move with me. At one point, I stood in the center of the cabin, eyes closed, just listening. And I had this thought, sudden and stupid, that if I opened my eyes, someone would be standing in front of me. Of course, no one was. I told myself I was tired, that I just wasn't used to this kind of silence anymore. I boiled some noodles, brushed my teeth, and locked the door. I checked it twice. The bed was firmer than I liked, but the blankets were warm. I left the fire burning low in the stove and turned off the light. I remember staring at the ceiling for a long time, waiting for sleep. And just as I started to drift off, I heard it. One single clear knock. From the back wall. 3 slow seconds passed. Then nothing. No footsteps, no voice. Just that same cold, unnatural quiet. I stayed frozen in bed, not moving, not breathing. The knock hadn't been loud, but it was real. Too real to have imagined. I told myself it was the wood settling, the stove ticking. Anything but what it sounded like. I didn't get out of bed. I didn't look. I just lay there with the covers up to my chin and eyes wide open until morning. Morning came gray, clouded over, but not raining. I got out of bed slower than I meant to. My back was stiff, my mouth dry. The fire had died out sometime in the night, and the cabin was colder than it had any right to be. I didn't mention the knock to anyone in my voice notes. Didn't write it down. I didn't even let myself think about it too long. Instead, I made coffee, walked outside, tried to reframe my headspace. The trees were still, too still. I stood on the porch, mug in hand, and listened. No wind, no birds, just an oppressive stillness that felt artificial. That's when I realized something else. There was no cell service, nothing new, but my GPS hadn't reconnected either, not even to send cached data. I tried walking down the path a few yards where the road curved. Still nothing, no signal, no bars. just an endless loading wheel. I figured I'd drive into town later, buy some food, maybe send a message to a friend to check in. But I couldn't shake this heaviness, like the trees themselves were watching. I went back inside, opened the windows, let in some light. And that's when I saw it. A mark near the base of the bedroom wall. It wasn't dramatic, just a smudge at first, brownish red, no bigger than a thumbprint. I bent down to wipe it, but it didn't wipe off. It had soaked into the wood. My first thought was mold or rust from the nails, but I've seen rust. I've seen mold. This looked older. It looked like blood. I stood there crouched, just staring at it for a long time. Then I told myself it didn't matter. It didn't have to be what it looked like. I wasn't a forensic scientist. I was a guy with a deadline, a weekend, and a cheap rental in the woods. So I stood up and saw another mark. On the inside of the closet door. Scratches. Not deep, but too random to be accidental. They weren't from a hanger or a suitcase. They were uneven, desperate. I reached out and touched them. Cold. The kind of cold that doesn't come from temperature but from instinct. I told myself again I was overthinking it, that I was feeding my imagination, that I'd watched too many documentaries, listened to too many late-night podcasts. But still, I didn't unpack. I didn't touch the closet again either. I spent the rest of the day pretending I was fine. I wrote maybe a paragraph, deleted it, started over. By mid-afternoon, I decided I'd go into town, stretch my legs, clear my head, maybe ask someone if they knew anything about the cabin. I grabbed my keys, stepped outside, and froze. There were tire tracks in the gravel driveway. Not mine. Mine curved in, stopped near the porch. These were separate. They came from deeper in the woods, and they were fresh. I didn't tell anyone about the tire tracks. I wasn't ready to admit to myself that someone else had been here, had come close to the cabin, without my knowledge. The thought set something inside me on edge. That night, I tried to stay busy. I chopped wood. I cleaned the stove. I ate some canned soup and reread my notes. But once the sun set, everything changed. The quiet was different now, thicker. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the presence of silence, like it was waiting, watching. I locked the door behind me twice, checked the windows, drew the curtains. Then I sat down near the stove with my notebook, hoping to write, but I couldn't focus. At one point, I glanced toward the front door and saw the faint outline of a shadow just beyond the glass. I blinked. Nothing. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the fire flickering, maybe a tree branch swaying. But then I heard it again. A knock. Slow, deliberate. From the back wall. 3 knocks, just like the first night. My heart hammered. I swallowed hard, told myself to stay calm. I didn't answer. There was silence after. Long silence. And then, a soft scraping. Something moving against the wood. I wanted to get up, to check the back wall, the windows, the porch. But I couldn't. I stayed rooted in my chair, staring into the fire until the scraping stopped. Eventually, exhaustion won. I forced myself to bed. Sleep came fitful, interrupted by distant creaks and whispers of wind. Before dawn, I woke. And there, in the cold morning light, I found something that changed everything. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But the morning made the impossible impossible to ignore. Just outside the back door, where I'd heard the knocks, the ground was disturbed. Scratches in the dirt, small footprints. Not animal, not human, exactly. Something in between. I knelt down to examine them. They led to a patch of undergrowth, tangled and dark. I followed them cautiously, feeling the cold sweat gather at my temples. Behind a thick cluster of ferns, I found it. A small, weathered box, covered in dirt, nearly swallowed by moss. My hand shook as I pried it open. Inside were papers, old letters, photographs, a notebook. The letters were yellowed, fragile, written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. They told a story I never expected. The cabin had been used decades ago as a refuge for someone on the run. The notes spoke of fear, paranoia, a desperate attempt to escape something. And then, chillingly, a warning. If you find this, leave. Don't stay. They don't like visitors. I sat there, clutching the box, heart pounding. The notebook had pages filled with sketches, figures with blank faces, eyes scratched out. One page had a crude map of the woods, marked with strange symbols. The sense of unease I'd felt from the moment I arrived suddenly made sense. There was a presence here, something old, something unresolved. The knock, the marks on the walls, the tire tracks, all signs that I was not alone, and never truly had been. I debated calling someone, the police, a friend, but the signal was still gone. And even if it wasn't, would anyone believe me? I felt trapped, alone, and watched. As the sun climbed, I realized I couldn't stay here, not without answers. I packed the box, locked the cabin, and started down the path toward the road. But just as I reached the edge of the trees, a sound stopped me cold. Behind me, a low, slow knocking. 3 times, the same rhythm. I didn't look back. I ran, faster than I thought possible. The knocking echoed behind me, taunting, relentless. 3 knocks. 3 knocks. I didn't stop until the trees thinned and the road stretched ahead, empty, silent. When I reached the highway, I finally had signal. I called a friend, told them everything, half frantic, half breathless. They promised to come get me. But I never went back. The cabin, the marks, the box, it all felt like a nightmare I could barely believe. Yet every time I close my eyes, I hear the knocks, the scratches on the closet door, the cold, unforgiving silence of those woods. I don't know what or who I encountered that weekend, but I know this. Some places hold memories that refuse to rest. Some stories refuse to stay buried. And some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. That cabin was supposed to be a quiet place to work, a simple rental on Airbnb, just a weekend away. But it became something else entirely. Something I'll never forget. And something I hope no one else ever has to experience. Because sometimes, what seems like a quiet place is anything but. I didn't think I'd ever talk about this. I guess I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad, that it was all in my head, that maybe I just misunderstood what I saw, misread what I felt. But even now, years later, I still check the locks 3 times. I still wake up at 3 a.m. with the sound of that floorboard, that one creaky board, playing in my head like it never stopped. This happened in a city people don't usually fear. A busy, modern, normal American place. Streets full of working people, coffee shops on every block, kids playing ball in front yards. It wasn't rural. It wasn't isolated. It wasn't the kind of place anyone would expect something like this to happen. But I was alone. That's important. I was traveling for work, just me, and I had this big presentation coming up the next day. Flights had been expensive that week. There was some conference in town. So I took the cheapest option that still had 5 stars and good reviews, Airbnb. I've used it dozens of times. Never thought twice. The listing said the neighborhood was quiet. Private, even. That word stuck out. Private. The pictures looked clean, modern. A little sparse, maybe. But I figured the host just wasn't into decor. And the price was way lower than the others nearby, which I told myself was because it was on the edge of the district, not quite downtown. Reviews seemed fine. No profile photo, but whatever. When I booked it, the host messaged almost immediately. He said, "Hey, welcome. Feel free to text me directly instead of using the app. It's faster that way." That should have been the first sign. But I was tired. I just wanted to drop my bags, shower, and run through my slides one more time. So I said, "Sure, I'll text." The ride there was longer than I expected. The driver got quiet once we crossed over a certain road. I didn't catch the name of it at the time, but I remember the vibe changing. The homes were older, more spaced out. A lot of them had boarded windows. One or two were fully abandoned. Still, when we pulled up, the house looked okay. White paint, newer roof, a little porch light flickering but working. The bushes were overgrown, but nothing that screamed danger. Just maybe a little unloved. The key wasn't in a lockbox like usual. The host said it would be under a loose board behind the trash bin. That part stuck with me. I had to crouch down behind the house and dig under this warped piece of wood. My hands got dirty. It was late, and I remember thinking, man, this is a weird setup. Inside, it smelled clean. Too clean. Like bleach, but faint. The kind of clean you notice because there's nothing else. No candle scent, no cooking smells. Just sterile. The lights flickered once when I turned them on. The switch for the hallway didn't work. I shrugged. Old house, I thought. But then I noticed the door to the bedroom. It had no lock on the inside. That made me pause. I tried to laugh it off, told myself it didn't matter. Who was going to come in? Still, I propped a chair under the knob, just for peace of mind. I didn't think about why I felt the need to do that. Later that night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth. That's when I noticed it. The mirror was perfectly square. Almost too perfect. Set into the wall like it was designed into the architecture. I leaned in. I swear it didn't reflect the way mirrors usually do. The glass had a slight tint, like it was just a little too dark. I tapped it once. It sounded hollow. That was the first time my stomach dropped. Not fear, just unease, like something didn't line up. But it was late. And I was tired, and I told myself I was overthinking it. The next morning I'd start to understand, but I didn't know that yet. I didn't know that while I was brushing my teeth, someone might have already been watching. That first night, I barely slept. Not because of the bed. It was firm, clean, even comfortable. But something about the silence in the house didn't feel like peace. I'm not someone who scares easily. I've traveled alone, backpacked in foreign countries, stayed in hostels with no locks and worse. But there's something different about being in a house where every sound has no source. Around 1 a.m., I heard a soft knock. Not on the door. On the wall. 3 taps, spaced apart, deliberate. I sat up immediately, heart racing. The house was supposed to be empty. I was renting the entire place. No shared units, no upstairs tenant. That's what the listing said. I waited, frozen, listened. Nothing. I told myself it could have been the pipes, old wood, settling. I know how these things work. But I couldn't shake the pattern of those knocks. 3, even. Purposeful. I got up and checked the hallway. No light. The switch still didn't work. I used my phone flashlight. The air was cooler out there, like someone had left a door open, but everything was shut. I walked quietly to the kitchen, opened the fridge. It was running, cold, stocked with 2 water bottles. That was it. No food, no condiments, no sign of anyone having lived there. The whole place felt like it had been set up quickly, like a movie set, functional but hollow. On the way back to the bedroom, I noticed something odd. A vent near the floor in the hallway. Square, metal, ordinary looking. Except there was no matching vent on the opposite wall. Just one. I bent down and peered inside. Darkness. Then something caught the light from my phone. A small reflection. A lens. I jerked back. I stared at it, heart hammering. I looked again. Could have been a trick of the light. Could have been a screw. Could have been dust. But it didn't look like any of those. I took a picture, flash on. Nothing obvious in the image. Just the dark grid of the vent. I told myself I was being paranoid. I went back to bed. Didn't sleep. At exactly 3:08 a.m., the hallway light turned on by itself. Just a quick flash, then off. I sat up, fully alert, listened. The silence returned, but it wasn't calming. It felt controlled. I didn't go out to check this time. I just sat there, under the covers, staring at the crack in the door, where a sliver of hallway should have been lit. It stayed dark. I stayed still. I don't think I blinked for 20 minutes. At some point, I must have dozed off sitting up. I woke up at dawn, the light outside dull and gray. I wanted to laugh it all off, say I was just overtired, jet-lagged, letting work stress mess with my head. That's what I told myself. The next morning, I made coffee in silence. The kitchen smelled like nothing. No trace of past meals, no faint scent of spice or oil. It felt like a model home, lived in only long enough to take pictures for a brochure. I checked my phone. I had one new notification. Motion detected, 3:08 a.m. I froze. It wasn't from my security system. I didn't have one. It was from the Airbnb app. The host had a Ring camera installed outside. I remembered seeing the little black circle near the doorbell when I arrived. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it, but now it showed motion detected. At the exact time the hallway light flickered on, I clicked to view the clip. The screen loaded. The footage was grainy. Empty front porch. Then, for exactly 1 second, a faint shape appeared in the bottom right, like a shadow passed too quickly across the camera. No clear outline. No sound. Just a blur. I replayed it 10 times. Could have been a car's headlights, or a bug, or someone just out of frame. I decided to ask the host. I messaged, "Hi. Thanks again for the stay. Just wondering, does the house have any interior sensors or motion detectors? I noticed the hallway light flickered last night." Probably nothing, but figured I'd ask. The reply came 10 minutes later. "Hi. No sensors or interior cameras, of course. Probably just the house settling. It's an older property. Let me know if you need anything else." It was friendly, casual, but I didn't mention cameras. Yet the host felt the need to say, "No interior cameras." That stuck with me. I tried to get on with my day. Worked from my laptop at the kitchen table. But my mind kept drifting. Something about that hallway vent kept replaying in my head. So I checked it again, this time in daylight. I knelt down and used a stronger flashlight app. There it was. A reflection, still faint. I got a screwdriver from my car and started unscrewing the faceplate. 4 screws. Rusted. Tight. It came off with a slight groan of metal. Behind it, just empty darkness. No duct. No air shaft. Just a sealed box. and inside, resting against the back wall, was a small rectangular object. Black, no label, no blinking lights. I didn't touch it. I backed away. My hands were shaking. I took pictures, sent one to a friend who works in tech. He replied immediately, "That looks like a Wi-Fi camera. Very small. Some models don't need a blinking LED." I checked the Airbnb listing again. It said, "No surveillance devices on property." I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to accuse anyone. I didn't want to make assumptions. But that night, I didn't sleep, and I didn't stay in the bedroom. That evening, I made a decision. I wouldn't sleep in the bedroom again. I set up a sleeping bag on the living room couch, where I could see both the front door and the hallway. I didn't close the blinds. I wanted to see out. More importantly, I wanted someone to know I was awake. I left the hallway light on this time. Around midnight, I heard something. Not a knock, not a creak. A footstep. Soft, careful, but unmistakable. It came from upstairs. Here's the thing. This Airbnb was listed as a single-story house. There was no mention of a second floor, no photos, no access indicated. I'd only ever noticed the locked door next to the bathroom, which I assumed led to storage. I stared up at the ceiling, waited. Then another step, then two more. I grabbed my phone. I recorded the ceiling. There was nothing to see, of course. But the sound was there. I watched that video later, again and again, counting the time between each step. They weren't random. They were moving, pacing. I messaged the host again. Quick question. Is there an upstairs area that's off limits? I heard what sounded like movement above the living room. No reply. I waited half an hour. Still nothing. I sent another message. This time, more direct. I just want to confirm. Is anyone else staying in this property besides me? I heard clear movement from above. If someone else is staying here, please let me know. 5 minutes later, the host responded. Nope, definitely no one else there. You have the whole place. Maybe raccoons in the attic? Had that once before. Raccoons don't walk in straight lines. Raccoons don't wear shoes. And they don't stop moving when you hold your breath. Because that's what I did. I sat completely still. And the moment I stopped making noise, so did the steps. Everything in me said to leave. Just grab my bag and go. But something else kept me there. Not pride, not fear, curiosity. The kind you regret later when you're looking back and wondering how much you ignored because you didn't want to seem dramatic. I got up quietly. I turned off the hallway light. I opened the door beside the bathroom. It was locked. Deadbolt. Inside facing. Meaning, someone on the other side could lock it, but not me. That door. I hadn't paid it any attention before. But now it felt like a border. Between what I was allowed to see, I put my hand on the door. And then something on the other side moved. No footsteps, no voices. Just the quiet shift of weight. As if someone else had placed their hand on the same door, at the same time. After that night, the unease settled in like a weight I couldn't shake. I decided to investigate further. I spent the following day walking the neighborhood, hoping to learn more about the house and its owner. But the neighbors were tight-lipped. One elderly woman answered my questions cautiously, then abruptly changed the subject when I asked about previous tenants. Another man hurried off without a word. My uneasiness deepened. That evening, I stayed alert, watching the house. Around 10 p.m., I noticed a car slowly pass by. Headlights dimmed, windows tinted. It circled the block twice, then parked a few houses down. I tried to catch a glimpse of the driver, but saw only a shadowed figure. I couldn't tell if they were watching me. Back inside, I received a message from the host. "Hope you're enjoying your stay. Let me know if you need anything." I didn't reply. Later that night, I checked the vent again. The small black device was gone. In its place was a tiny scrap of paper, folded, worn. I unfolded it carefully, written in barely legible handwriting. "You're not alone." My heart hammered. The house, once a place of refuge, was now a trap. A stage set for something I could neither understand nor control. I wanted to leave, but I was caught in a web of doubt and fear. What if leaving meant provoking whoever was watching? What if staying meant losing control? That's when I noticed the living room window, a small crack, not enough for a person to slip through, but enough for someone to peek in. I pulled back the curtain just enough to look outside. The street was empty, but a shadow lingered behind the hedge. Still, watching. I stayed up all night wrestling with what to do next. When the first light crept through the blinds, I made a decision. I had to find out who or what was behind the door next to the bathroom. I called a locksmith. The technician arrived within the hour, his demeanor calm but professional. As he worked on the lock, I sat quietly in the living room, watching shadows lengthen with the rising sun. The door clicked open. Behind it was not a closet, not a storage space, but a narrow staircase descending into darkness. I grabbed my phone, switched on the flashlight app, and cautiously stepped inside. The air was cold, damp, the faint scent of mildew mixed with something metallic. The stairs led to a basement, a room filled with old furniture, boxes, and, most disturbing, a wall covered in photos, faces, places, times, all pinned, connected by strings of red thread, like a map of someone's private world. And then I saw it, a small desk, cluttered with electronics, multiple screens, cameras, and recording devices. It wasn't just surveillance. It was an obsession. I felt my breath catch. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The presence was close, just beyond the edge of my light. I realized then this wasn't a simple Airbnb host. This was someone who watched, someone who knew far more than they ever let on. I stayed frozen, trying to steady my breath. I didn't wait to be invited. I ran. Outside, the cold morning air hit me like a wave. I didn't look back. I left everything behind. Later, I reported the incident to the local authorities. The house was investigated. Cameras and recording devices were found, some hidden, some in plain sight. It appeared the host had been watching multiple guests, not just me, and the neighbors. They confirmed strange comings and goings at odd hours. The police couldn't explain it all. The house was put up for sale, quietly, without fanfare. For me, the experience left a lasting mark, a reminder that sometimes, beneath the surface of the everyday, things can be far more unsettling than we want to believe. I never forgot that house, or what waited behind that locked door. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this story, it's this. Trust your instincts, because sometimes the quietest warning is the loudest.